The major topic of my research is corporate law, and in particular, corporate governance. My contribution to this is an attempt to understand how corporations actually make decisions and how they will respond to new regulations. The short answer is they're likely to treat environmental law not as a moral imperative, but as something like the tax code, to be evaded if possible, complied with to the minimum amount permissible. Good for the corporation today means accounting profits, or sometimes shareholder profits, or sometimes CEO profits. But what it always means is profits in a measurable form. When I dump carbon in the atmosphere, it doesn't cost me anything. It costs all of us something. If it doesn't affect the bottom line, it's somebody else's job to worry about it. And that's why so much of environmental regulation is centered around the idea that we need to make the polluter pay. Corporations are staffed with people whose job it is to figure out how to comply with the regulation at the minimum cost possible. Decent people can convince themselves that it's their job to do things that they know are wrong, that it's right to do wrong. And those people are likely to be the ones most successful inside the organization. So at any given time, they're likely to dominate it. Indeed, if they don't dominate the firm, then another firm, which is dominated by profit-seeking people, is likely to make more profits and be more successful and take over the industry. So you can assume that most of the time, most industries will be dominated by profit seekers. If we design systems that require external enforcement, or that assume that firms are law-abiding, they won't work. And they won't work because the firms will be able to outsmart the regulators. They have more staff, they're more on the ground, they understand the system better. They'll quickly figure out the places where the regulators have made mistakes, and they will exploit them. A really large disaster you don't think about if you're a corporation, because if you're a corporation and you have a really large disaster, you file for bankruptcy. For global warming, that means that ordinary corporate decision-making processes simply won't take it into account. If it screws up in a really big way, then it just walks away from the mess. So here's an example. Here's an example. One of the popular proposals has been cap and trade. The problem is that from the perspective of a profit-maximizing professional inside the corporation, the cheapest thing to do is likely to be to sell your quota and then continue to pollute on the assumption that it's going to be quite difficult for anybody to catch you anyway. And even if they do, they probably won't fine you enough to make it worth your while to stop. Often the easiest way to make money in the face of a regulatory regime is to lobby to change the regulatory regime. Lobbying is frequently cheaper than compliance. And in the global warming context, this is always going to be true. It's always going to be cheaper to persuade somebody in the regulatory agency or in the Congress that now is the moment when it is too difficult to increase the price of gas. Now is the moment when there are too many people who will suffer if we have to redesign our automobiles. Here's how you help make it work. Ideally, you want each firm to be policing its competitor, or policing its suppliers, so that the government doesn't have to do it all. Government's not going to be able to do it all. There has to be something in here that makes the other organizations police each other. Maybe what we need to do is start by pricing the carbon right at the beginning. Make people pay for it at the beginning. So if the original carbon producer has to pay some large fee, then they'll collect it from the next person up the chain, the person they sell the carbon to, or they sell the energy to. And that person will then collect it from the person who they sell the product that they made with the energy. And this way the price gets included in all the products, and what was formerly free, dumping carbon into the air, now gets included as part of the product. It's hard for one party to cheat We only have to police the people at the bottom, the ones who are taking the carbon out of the ground. We have to police them. But we have to police them in a relatively simple way. We just have to see how much carbon-containing fuel they're taking out of the ground. But after that, we don't have to police the rest of the economy. Is there a way you can make corporations responsive to values other than pure profit? In some ways, this is a much harder task. But in some ways, it's a more important one. Because in the end, the corporations, our major corporations, are our major institutions. They're bigger than the government. They're the institutions that really determine the way we live. Now, I don't mean to disparage profit. Profit's good. Better to be rich than poor. But it's not everything. It's not everything. Almost everybody, almost every human being has some value. Some point at which they'll say, look, enough money is enough. There are other things that are more important.
That took a lot longer than a minute. What are we going to do?
Deal with it.